Hi friend, and welcome back to Marvelous Friends, your home for all things Marvel Cinematic Universe and beyond. I'm Rhett, and today I am discussing Fury's in-credit scene from Far From Home. Roll that credit. Now, don't you worry, this is not some theory video about how Pokemon and the Avengers are making a crossover debut, as there are, of course, Pokemon games coming out later this year with the same title as this video. However, Pikachu, assemble! No, I'm just kidding with you. This is clearly about the end-credit scene from the Far From Home movie involving Nick Fury. So if you have not seen Far From Home yet, please click off right now. I do not want to spoil the film for you. Of course, definitely click on the card up here and enjoy some of my other content. However, for those of you who have seen this, you of course know that there is a very confusing end-credit scene involving Nick Fury at the end of the movie, and I'm going to dive into that right here. We of course know that S.H.I.E.L.D. exists, and there's actually a counterpart in the comics called SWORD, hence the name of this video. S.H.I.E.L.D. of course stands for Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division, whereas SWORD stands for the Sentient World Observation Response Division. I memorized that. It is my belief that we saw Fury enjoying his holographic beach vacation upon the space station that SWORD is based out of. Now this fits very well into what little we do know about Phase 4 of the MCU. We do know that, of course, there's going to be a strong division, according to Feige, between Earthbound and cosmic level stories. Now this would allow for that purpose, with S.H.I.E.L.D. being Earthbound and this being more defensive against outer space threats, allowing for them to kind of draw that line in the upper atmosphere and still kind of establish that Earth and cosmic level story while allowing for a crossover of characters, references between the two, and we still do need a kind of cosmic protector here on Earth. Now mainly this would be to allow the crossovers of Nick Fury's character, I believe, with him primarily being the stationed representative on this space station, so he can interact with Earth characters, but because it's in outer space, he can interact with those cosmic characters, so really kind of allowing him to be a much more fluid character in the MCU moving forward. We do know that it is the year of the Fury, and I think that trend will probably continue into the near future. Now, this would also allow for some very interesting interactions with Peter Quill and Thor. One thing that is really overlooked in the Endgame story is that Peter Quill, who is from Earth, only spent a brief moment of time here when he shows up for that final battle against Thanos, and then immediately takes off back into the cosmos. With such a strong focus to find Gamora, who is missing, he kind of forgets about the fact to take a time to really explore the Earth that he has been away from for so long. So I could kind of see him potentially coming back at some point to kind of close out and kind of end his character story by having some time either on the space or through the space coming back to Earth. It'd be a very kind of interesting point to his story, at least, and it'd be a great use of the SWORD space station. Now I am getting off topic just a little bit, and you know my tendency to ramble, so before I go too deep into that rabbit hole, let's get back on track with exactly what is SWORD as an organization and what it can mean for the MCU moving forward. Well, one thing it can mean is a lot of new characters that can be introduced through the organization, as it does have kind of a lot of relations with various characters in the comics. Now, it is, of course, established by S.H.I.E.L.D. as a division of the organization, and therefore has kind of roundabout ties to Fury, which we see a little bit more directly here as Fury is on the station, setting up and building it as we speak. Now, what this does mean is that in the comics, eventually Fury does step down as director, which is eventually something that's going to happen. And when this happens, that's when that kind of division between this two start. Now, SWORD has its own director, which will be a prime role I definitely see will be popping up at some point in Phase 4, a huge casting for a female role in the name of Abigail Brand, who serves as the director of SWORD. Skrulls actually play a major role in the comics as well with Peak. Peak is the name of the actual space station itself that SWORD is based out of. Here in this short clip, we see that Skrulls are actually assisting Fury to build the station itself, and I would assume living on it as well. This is derived from the relationship that is built between Fury and the Skrulls back during the events of Captain Marvel. In fact, it's Talos and his wife from that movie that are serving as the stand-ins on Earth for Fury and Maria Hill. This, of course, does raise a whole other question to be discussed as to whether Maria Hill actually exists or if she's been a Skrull the entire time, as we have no reference point to what she has been up to during these events when a Skrull has been in her persona. So maybe she is a Skrull the entire time. I don't know at this point. It's definitely something to think about. I am going to say real quick again, though, that I was disappointed that this whole reveal came out without a reference to Toast. I mentioned that in my 5 and 5 up in the card. Check that out. Now, in the comics, though, it's a slightly different story. The interaction with the Skrulls and Peak/Sword is a lot more devastating. Now, this is a major player and a point in the plot of the Secret Invasion story, something I know everyone has talked about in great deal, and I'm going to circle back to that at the end of this little kind of explanation. Now, as a part of their initial invasion and reveal of the Secret Invasion that they have been doing all this time, they actually blow up the space station, destroying it and kind of killing most of the Sword staff. This allows for their aircrafts to come in and land on the planet to further the invasion, as well as taking out a major kind of supportive role and source of backup troops for the Avengers on Earth. Now, I'm going to say this right here. I do not believe we are heading towards a Secret Invasion story. These Skrulls are playing a major role, yes, within the MCU, and I'm excited to see how that kind of continues to evolve moving forward, and their role here on Earth and in the cosmic realm, and I'm sure that we will see in Captain Marvel when that story continues. However, I think it is far too obvious at this point for Marvel to go the route of Secret Invasion to restart the MCU when that time comes. First of all, everything that we've seen them in, both in Captain Marvel in this clip, and we actually have Skrull character in the Runaways, all these show them as much more of a kind of lesser viewed breed of aliens, them in a kind of subsidiary role, them very much so on the run, not having the power to kind of execute this invasion. So some major changes in their level within presence of the MCU and what they are as characters is going to have to take some serious stepping stones and 180s to get to the point where they would aggressively invade the Earth, especially considering it looks like we are helping the race quite a lot at this point. So I don't want to say that that's going to happen, never, but I definitely don't see that being what will ultimately be the first reset of the MCU to kind of start over. I think there's plenty of reset events within the comics to pull from. Some of them are very interesting. Some of them I think that'd be amazing because they would come out of nowhere and be kind of shockers, and I think that'd be a lot more interesting for us as an audience than something that is so obvious. And I think, again, I will say this term over and over again in these videos, it is a red herring. It's something to kind of us as an audience to latch on to as something that's a potential to kind of keep us focused on that while they're over here working their magic to plow us through with a surprise. So I'm going to say it here. My official stance is no Secret Invasion storyline anywhere in the near future, maybe way off in the distance somewhere in 15, 20 years when they need to do the second reset as we see a whole new batch of Skrulls. I don't know, but for the time being, stop it with the Secret Invasion. Besides the obvious Captain Marvel and Skrull tie-in that this presents, there are several other Earthbound storylines that we can see tie-ins to Sword as well. And the first of them is going to be one of those things that I've mentioned quite a bit, that we're going to see those initial stepping stones taking place now in Phase 4, and that is the X-Men. Now, the X-Men kind of have a very interesting partnership/rivalry with the Avengers, and of course, S.H.I.E.L.D. aligns himself very closely with the Avengers, which means having a space station with what I'm sure is loaded full of Stark tech, like the satellite we saw quite a deal in Far From Home, would allow for them to keep a very close eye on this kind of rival organization of the X-Men. Now, Sword goes as far to place an agent/mole within the X-Men, and this is the character Lockheed. Yes, the pet dragon of Shadowcat. Now, what this means to me is that because Sword is going to be playing a role in the MCU moving forward to some degree, potentially, almost guarantees that Shadowcat will be on the roster of X-Men we will see come their introduction, which I would really like to see this version, as we didn't have Lockheed as a character in the original Fox iteration with the Shadowcat character. I really like Shadowcat, so hopefully we get to see her. Heck, I would even be okay with Paige returning to play her in a much kind of more mature role, as she is still very much so a part of the sci-fi drama kind of action film industry, as she recently played a character on the Umbrella Academy. I'd love to see her step back in as Shadowcat as well. But wait, there's more. One of the major players in the storyline is actually Spider-Woman. Now, Spider-Woman is a spy for both S.H.I.E.L.D. and S.W.O.R.D. and has very similar power sets, of course, to our own current web crawler, Peter Parker, in the MCU. Now, this would make sense for S.H.I.E.L.D. to potentially look out for a alternate for Peter Parker. In the film Far From Home, we do kind of see him being very reluctant to really step up to really take this full leadership role within the Avengers, and perhaps because of these events, Fury does kind of realize that, yeah, he's just a kid. He's too young to take this kind of leadership role, so they look to enhance one of their own agents with similar abilities. Therefore, we get Spider-Woman. Now, this would cause for some very interesting crossovers with Spider-Man, of course, but the most important thing I think for Marvel would be that this would be a character of their own complete control that has spider abilities, as Spider-Woman is not part of that Sony deal and is nowhere in the characters of that negotiation process or anything like that, so she would be completely Marvel. Now, this would make mostly for probably a Disney Plus franchise if she were to get her own story, which I'd hope she would, because just having two web-slinger franchises in the movie theaters, I think would be too much and maybe slightly repetitive. So it would allow for, again, better control of that. Now, eventually a crossover probably would happen and be inevitable, and those discussions then, of course, would proceed. And Marvel would have to be very careful with her origin story as to not step on toes regarding certain aspects of Peter Parker's origin story and crossing too many paths to open up issues with Sony. However, like I said, ultimately that will probably have to happen with the character and her role with Spider-Man being an obvious one at some point. So those discussions probably will happen with Sony at some point regarding it, but at least the initial launch would be completely in Marvel's control, which I think they would really like. But we are still not done tying things into current franchises. Now, there's a lot of talk about the crossover that will eventually happen with Peter Parker and Spider-Man, with Marvel really wanting to use him to introduce other characters into the MCU, which makes perfect sense. He's a character in the comics that often teams up with so many other characters. I talk about this in a video specifically. Again, check the card. Now, what we have been kind of seeing both as fans and what the production teams are wanting is looking at either Deadpool or potentially Venom. Of course, Marvel is okay with either and would like to explore both options, potentially even both at some point, but Sony has a much more vested interest to use their rights own character of Venom, as it's more money obviously in their pocket. And this fits in perfect and would be a great catalyst for bringing these two characters together in a crossover. Not to get into a long whole definition here, because I think this would be a fantastic video on its own, I will just say that at some point in the history, the peak space station is taken over by the symbiotes. Now, this would allow for Peter, who is working with S.H.I.E.L.D./S.W.O.R.D., to seek out Venom, who would be the expert in this situation, to take on this threat. Beyond the idea of creating storylines for other characters, S.W.O.R.D. does have quite a bit to offer on its own, as it has been the focus of many of their own independent storylines, with Brand being their leader of various missions. This could offer a great replacement for the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. show when it eventually bows out, which I do feel that that is kind of ever getting closer as the show continues on. This would allow for a great transition from the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to the S.W.O.R.D. agents show, with them kind of following along, again, similar missions, but because they are much more cosmic based, would allow for a kind of a different aspect of missions, though we do see that S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't really shy away from going to cosmic levels with their storylines. But it would kind of allow for some, again, great crossovers as one show ends and the other one starts, and then great cameos moving forward as potentially like Melinda May or Quake show up on the S.W.O.R.D. peak station to kind of assist with a mission, and it would allow for some great cameos for that show as well. I will say I think having both shows would be problematic to both of them, as they'd be a little bit too similar in storyline aspects for them to both function long-term at the same time. I also would say probably this would make a great Disney Plus kind of long-term periodical season run for the platform, as really what we've all seen so far announced as original programming is going to be much more short, kind of binge-focused franchises. So it would be something different for the platform that I would think would be great. Or, like I said, it would be great to just kind of transfer Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to Agents of S.W.O.R.D. on NBC, introducing us to a whole new kind of new cast of characters. I personally, though, of course, would watch both of these if they were running simultaneously. That's just who I am. I can't get enough, and I watch everything, even the TV shows. But I know for the general public, I don't think two shows running so close together that are so similar would do very well. The timing of all this is perfect as well, as we again will see this strong division between Earth and cosmic level hero storylines. But that doesn't mean that the Earth is not going to be affected by kind of cosmic level intrusions onto Earth, especially with Doctor Strange. He deals with some various kind of things, including cosmic and interdimensional issues. So having this kind of protective barrier is going to be very crucial for the MCU moving forward on Earth. Now, this could definitely come from the idea of Fury wanting to have a backup plan, considering he is a little unsure about the future of Avengers. With Thor and Captain Marvel, people that he sees as stable potential leaders, both having left to go back into the cosmos, and him not really sure who's going to be stepping up on Earth. And again, the events of Far From Home showing that perhaps Spider-Man isn't exactly ready. So he needs a backup plan, and perhaps finally pulling through on Tony Stark's plan to put a shield around the world is just what he's decided to do with establishing Sword. And like I said, I feel like this is going to come from a lot of Tony Stark tech being involved in it, perhaps even the plans for the space station, everything coming directly from Tony, being left for Fury upon his death. Him kind of knowing that when they are gone, that something is going to need to be put in place to replace them as a new team is developed. Now, I hope this helps kind of clear up what exactly was going on, potentially, in that final scene at the very end of all the credits. And I hope you kind of are excited for what potential this has for the MCU like I am. Do you like what it has to offer? What are your thoughts? And what would you like to see from Sword's involvement in the MCU moving forward? Let me know down in those comments. Now, if you like this theory and everything, make sure to give this video a like. I really do appreciate it, and it just really supports me and continues my kind of enthusiasm about making these videos. Now, there's a lot more still to break down and talk about from Far From Home, so also make sure you subscribe and set those alerts to make sure you don't miss a thing as we continue on. Until then, though, I love you all 3,000, and I hope you have a marvelous rest of your day. Bye, friend!